Hi, my name is Tammy Medlin, and I'm the local history librarian here at the Wilson County Public Library, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for a chat with Joanne. This is Miss Joan Howell, who is well known for doing the Wilson County Cemetery books. How are you doing today, Miss Joanne?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Okay, Miss Joanne, let me ask you, how and when did you become interested in genealogy?
Well, it was a long time ago. I was in school when I was probably 13, a teacher assigned the students to write their autobiography. And our first chapter was supposed to be our ancestors. And I went home and asked my parents about our ancestors, and I was just turned on then. From then on, I kept on.
So those school assignments are good for something.
Yes.
Okay, so a lifelong love of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number 2, what made you decide to focus on cemeteries? What got you into cemeteries?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't focus on cemeteries at first, but I did a lot of research at Smithfield, at the Heritage Center there, and they had done their cemeteries in Johnson County, and I knew that we hadn't, and I just felt like it needed to be done. And so I talked to them about it, and they gave me some pointers, and then I came back here and thought about it. The archives, the state archives in the 80s
Yes.
had asked each county to do their cemeteries, and ours hadn't been done. So I discovered, after phoning several people, I discovered that the maps, the 15 maps that encompass Wilson County, had been sent to the commission. And I called the commission that was supposed to have received them, and he said I could have them. I think there wasn't any funding for it, and so it hadn't been done. He gave me those, and the first night I got the maps, and they're very large maps. And the first night I got those maps, and I opened up one, and I started in circling every place a cemetery was designated. And I stayed up very, very late that night. I was just so excited. And so that's how I began on cemeteries. I think it was because Lib Ross at Johnson County started me in. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me ask you, where do you find information about cemeteries and who's buried there? Where do you go looking for the information besides the maps? Because were there cemeteries that weren't on that map?
There were many. The maps were dated 1971. And so cemeteries that had been done after that time were not on those maps. And we found many, and so we've had to make our own little marking. And so, yes, there were lots that weren't on those maps. And you asked me where I found information about the cemeteries. Mostly people. When they knew that the cemeteries were being surveyed, they were eager to get their cemetery in the book. And so it would be people. And lots of times people would not know exactly who was buried there or exactly where it was. And lots of times they told us about cemeteries that no longer existed. And we made note of those too. Of course, we didn't know who was buried there, but death certificates have been very, very helpful. And so we went to the courthouse and looked at death certificates. And the sad thing about death certificates, many times when it asks where the person was buried, it says in the county. And that didn't help us a bit.
That wasn't much help.
No, it wasn't. But at least we knew that it was somewhere in Wilson County. so that gave us something to start on. And it's the Works project that was ongoing in the early 40s. Many of those people were, and the government was putting people to work who needed a job and needed money. And so these people would go, one of their jobs was to survey cemeteries. And so they did that, but they weren't real genealogists and they weren't real particular. And so we've had to make sure that that information was correct. But there again, it gives us a starting point. It gives us a lead. And those were done in the 1941 mostly. So, you know, it dates back. Their assignment was to record all the burials that were before 1913, because 1913 is when death certificates began being recorded in the courthouse. There again, some people after 1913 didn't get death certificates recorded for one reason or another. I was just trying to think, there are so many, well, people just, especially people who have lived in the county for a long time, they know where all these cemeteries, well, no, they don't know where all of them are. We wish they did. But they give us information and tell us about cemeteries, and that, again, gives us a start.
So that's how you basically found out about, especially the family cemeteries, was word of mouth.
Yes, oh yes.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Which cemetery, and probably family cemeteries, because the public ones would be marked, which cemetery, have you had one that's been the hardest to find, that was kind of tricky to find?
A lot of them. Now, I'd like to just back up and say that in the beginning, it was around it was around 1990, and we would just drive along. There's a cemetery, and there's a cemetery, and there's another one. But after we've done 5 volumes, those cemeteries aren't out where you can see them. They're in the woods or overgrown terribly, and so it's not easy to find. But there again, people tell us when they, you know, some of them have been here a long time, and they, maybe as a youngster, they were rambling around like little kids do, and they knew that there were cemeteries there. And so word of mouth has really been, you know, when people tell us, that's so helpful to us. It really is. I'm trying to think other information, the maps that we have that are marked with cemeteries on them. But that helped at first, but after we did all of those that were marked on the maps, then we were finding cemeteries that weren't marked on the maps. And so those we were having to search for more.
Well, let me ask you this. Who are some of the people, because I know there's no way one person could do this by themselves, especially out walking in the woods looking for a cemetery.
That's right.
And I know you said word of mouth, but who are some of the people who have actually gone out and helped you find the cemeteries and record the information?
Okay. At the very first, Gerald Lamb, who lived in Lucama, he went with me, and he helped me for a long time before he moved to Raleigh. He could see a cemetery. I mean, it was like he sensed where cemeteries were. So he was a wonderful, wonderful help. My younger sister Trudy went with me lots of times, and Sue Powell and Deborah West were a great help. And early on, many of the Wilson County Genealogical Society members looked for cemeteries and recorded them. Lynn Lamb recently has been a real help. She just, when I say cemetery, she's ready to go. Brian Grauberg, he has not gone with me to record cemeteries, but he goes to cemeteries and brings back information to me. Sometimes he doesn't bring back all the information I want, and so either he goes back or I have gone back. Speaking of Brian Grauberg, I'd like to just tell you how we met. I was volunteering in the library one time, and I saw that there was a man working back there, and I went to get something from the shelf, and I saw that he had one of my cemetery books, I say. He had one of the cemetery books open, and he was writing things down. And I just asked him what he was working on. And he told me he had a project, and his project was different than mine. He was trying to find cemeteries that were hidden, that hadn't been done before. And so he was looking in the cemetery book, and I just told him, again, I said, that's one of the books that I've helped with. And I was so excited about that. And ever since then, he has found information because he's wanting to find cemeteries. Our end goal is very, very different. He does a lot of photographing of cemeteries, and he's had a project at the Imagination Station, and he has photographed many of the unusual cemeteries, and he's had a project there. Mm-hmm. And so our goals were very, very different, but a lot of the work we were doing was being done by each of us. And so we've really shared a lot of information now. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, next question. What has been your most interesting or unusual find? Because I'm sure you found some good ones.
Yes. My memory is not nearly as good as Brian's is. I told him he should be the one to tell you about unusual cemeteries, but there is a cemetery dog is buried, and there also is a dog buried in Maplewood. People want their loved ones to be with them. And so that's unusual. And I think in one of the cemeteries, as I recall, a man's arm was buried, separate from him. Apparently he lost an arm. Some of them that have been way, way back in the woods are interesting because we just don't think we're going to find it. And as a matter of fact, there are several cemeteries that we know of, but they're back in very, very thick, heavy woods. And it's so thick that we can't get in there. And that's so discouraging.
I know.
I'm trying to think.
That would be like me seeing a book on the very top shelf or down under the shelf,
yes.
And I can't reach it.
Yes. And I said if we could just fly over, and I'm trying to remember the little
Drone.
Yes. I told Brian that he and I should buy a drone and go over and see if we could see anything, but I think some of it's too thick, But I would do that if it would help. Another one that was interesting, I guess it was interesting because we looked so hard for it, and it was by the rock quarry. And I bet I went past where the directions told me to go. I bet I went past that 8 times, and I never saw it. And we finally found someone who knew about it. As a matter of fact, they were keeping it up, but it was way back in a driveway. We never would have found it. Never, ever.
Well, that answers the next question is, do you have any stories?
Well, one story is Gerald and I were out searching, and the radio alerted us to the fact that we were right where a hurricane was coming. And so we drove on and debated about what we should do, and when things looked really bad, we drove into somebody's driveway, and there was a big ditch there, and we talked about if that ditch would be a safe place to be when the hurricane came. But we weren't going to quit with cemetery. You know, they say neither rain or snow, or, well, I've been out recording on a clipboard things when snow was falling. And it was falling and making my paper wet, and I couldn't keep recording.
Determined. You're very determined.
Oh, yes. I guess another story is early on, before I really knew people here, because I had moved here recently at that time, and I would go out and record cemeteries by myself. And my husband was helping his brother with the farm work. And so one time I went out all by myself. Nobody knew where I was going. I didn't even know where I was going. And I found a cemetery, but it was way back. And so I parked my car, and no one would ever have known I was there. But I had my camera, and the stone was hard to read. So of course I used shaving cream and did like this. And so I wanted to take a picture of it after I had made it so legible with the shaving cream. And so when I did that, I got my camera out and I started to take a picture of it. And I backed up a little bit and I fell backwards. And that was just about the end of my going out by myself, and at least not telling anybody where I was. It was foolish, but I was eager to go, and you can't always get somebody else who's available.
Well, last question. We have 5 volumes. Is there going to be a 6th cemetery book, and what type of cemeteries may be in it?
It's all those hard to find cemeteries. I was going to say, I hope that I last long enough to see that book finished. Brian knows that if I don't, he's going to have to take it over. But we've got lots of cemeteries, and in it we're going to put some of these cemeteries that have been mentioned to us, but have not, we don't know who's buried there. And so it'll have some that people aren't aware of. Yes. So I think in that respect it should be valuable.
Okay. Well, you will last because you're
determined.
You're too determined not to.
Yes.
But thank you for coming in today, Miss Joanne. I have really enjoyed it, and I think everybody else will too. And have a very Merry Christmas.
And you too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.